first program this summer. We are going to hear about the history of C.B. Cummings family and business. Brad Cummings. I'm Brian Partridge. I'm one of the board members here and also a great-great-grandson of C.B. Cummings. So should be an interesting evening. And Brad is, he was the former treasurer and president of C.B. Cummings until finally closed. And he is CB2, C.B. Cummings number 2. We've got a lot of other programs this year at the Norway Museum and Historical Society. We have the Norway Unitarian Universalist Church. Bear Stevenson will present next door at the church there. The meaning behind the church's beautiful stained glass windows. That is on July 18th. August 8th, Tuesday, the Norway Clubs of the Past. Sue Dennison will introduce some of the lesser-known organizations there. We have the Norway History Walking Tour, which will be September 23rd on a Saturday. This will focus on historic buildings on Main Street and the people associated with them. And reenactors will tell the stories. We did this last year and it was quite a success, so we're going to do other buildings this year and have different characters. So, July 8th is the Music and Arts Festival here on Main Street, and the Miracle Tea Room, which is this room, which will be transformed into a homemade pie with ice cream shop, and we will be selling slices of pie from 11 to 2 p.m. So, without further ado, unless Ann has something else to add right now, present Bradley Cummings.
Well, thank you, everybody. As Brian mentioned, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Brad Cummings, and my real name is Charles Bradley Cummings. And so, if you think about the guy that started C.B. Cummings and Sons, his name was also Charles Bradley Cummings, and I hope the irony is not lost on you that he started the company and I finished it. It's like two bookends in a long story, 140-year story, no less. Actually, it sounds like it should be a historical novel or something, or a movie.
Stephen.
If it is a movie, I want George Clooney to take it. Absolutely. So anyway, I want to acknowledge that we do have some progeny here of C.B. Cummings in the audience here. We have Bob and Brian Partridge. It's Bob and Brian Partridge. And Deborah was married to their brother Jay, who was involved in helping to run the company for many, many years. They and I come down through the same family line, and I'll describe that in a minute when I talk about C.B. Cummings and his offspring. There are other people here in town as well. For those of you who know Steve and Rob Cummings, they come down through another branch of the family. And Sherry Onofrio Grant actually comes down through the only daughter that C.B. Cummings had. So he had 5 sons and 1 daughter. And the daughter was not involved in the family business, but Sherry's grandfather, Henry. Yeah, got that right. So I got people helping me around. Henry Cullinan worked for many years, so he was an offspring through the daughter, from Fanny. We also have in attendance here some former employees. How many employees, former employees, do we have here? It's great to see you guys. Now, I'll be honest, you don't stay in business 140 years without good employees. And so employees really made the difference there, people who were very dedicated to the success of the place and showed up every day and did their job. And in some cases, it was multiple generations of employees as well as the ownership that kept that place running successfully.
I forgot I was an employee too.
We'll pick out some of the products that you might have made. You go through the products. So, yeah, I think all of us, my brother Gary and I spent many summers working at the mill. And, oh boy, some of the jobs we did were just, you know, it was before we started working there, we were in high school, and before we could really run machinery. So we would get to go out and do the hand scything out around in the log yard. We get to wash windows that got washed once a year. Oh my God, they were dirty. Oh my God, they were dirty. Painting buildings, scraping. Oh, I hated scraping. And eventually you get to the point where you can do a few mechanical things, and then I went off to college, and my brother went elsewhere. I never believed I would ever have come back here. Just never believed it. Through good fortune, things happening, the position opened up at C.B. Cummings, and I came back to work there, and I was working there, you know, from '86 to 2003 when we closed. And I ended up being the president and treasurer as my dad retired, and grandfather, Rutledge's grandfather before retired. So we'll talk about the family lineage here just in a minute here. All right, so the story of C.B. Cummings and Sons, I'm going to stick to my notes here because there's so much to talk about. I can really stray off in all sorts of tangents here. So I'll stick to my notes here first, and then we can wander a little bit once we talk about some pictures and some of the things that we made. The story of C.B. Cummings and Sons starts with C.B., Charles Bradley, who was born the fifth of 7 children of Stephen Cummings, Jr. C.B. was born in Norway in 1834. He moved to Bethel in the 1850s, and at some point he met Francis Staples. Now, Staples is a pretty common, pretty entrenched name here in this area. The Staples family been here a very long time. And they were married in 1861. They eventually had 5 sons and 1 daughter, and 3 of the 5 sons were involved in the business, and the I can tell you what they did. There was a 4th son who was not involved in the business, and yet he appears in the records when the company changes a little bit in the 19-teens. We'll talk about that in a second. When C.B. was 20, which was 1854, he entered the cabinet shop of William Whitney in Norway. And this was the start of C.B. Cummings' involvement making furniture. And I've got a picture of the furniture shop right here. Picture of the furniture shop, which apparently was right on this site, right here. Yeah, is that right, Charlie? Yeah, right here. So they made finished furniture, and I'm sure that came as a result of C.B. being involved in working for this Whitney gentleman. He was a very enterprising man. He had a furniture store on Main Street. He had an interest in a sawmill at Steep Falls, which is down on Lower Main Street. There are a number of other industries down there, too, using water power down there back in that day. And he had a sawmill at the outlet of Norway Lake making lumber. And we think... Thank you, Anna. We think that's what it looked like here up on Norway Lake. We can't quite put it exactly where. Charles, do you know, maybe? Exactly where that was located? That sawmill up on Norway Lake? Is it?
Not precisely, but the general area would be where the original bridge that came down off Pleasant Street.
Yeah. Okay.
Just beyond that.
Okay. So it was tucked right up to the north end of Main Street here.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So he was quite an enterprising guy. And so in the 1860s, of course, we have the Civil War in the 1860s. C.B. served in the Civil War in Company H of the Light Infantry, 3rd Division of the Maine Volunteer Militia. I did not find what he did in the reading that I did. I'm assuming it was very heroic. I mean, after all, it just had to be. But whatever his accomplishments were, I have not heard from Ken Burns. So apparently, it was nothing too outstanding. But in any case, he apparently served because it's in the newspapers. The factory location that we all remember, those of us who remember this place on Bridge Street, right across the street, which is now the site of the Medical Arts Building, Medical Arts Building over there, initially made boxes and wooden heel components for shoes. So it was anything, none of the products here were being made. Water power was insufficient for power, so they built a steam plant there. And you know what happens next. 1894, I don't know if it was the steam plant or what it was, the Great Norway Fire starts at C.B. Cummings and Sons. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did that. Despite the devastation that occurred along Main Street, the factory and the Main Street buildings were rebuilt in a fairly short order, at least by today's standards. The brick Opera House building, right over here, of course, the big clock tower at the top, was part of the urban renewal that C.B. Cummings was helping with. Okay, so that was all built post-fire. The factory was rebuilt after the fire, as well as the grain mill out on Cottage Street. Now, for those of you that know Cottage Street, there are a couple of buildings out there. It's funny, I drive by there all the time. Are they still gray?
Yeah,
Yeah, they're still gray.
that's the color Gary and I painted.
Yeah, I love going out there because we stored our dowels out there, and there used to be a train siding that was coming right up to the grain mill there, and we used to go out there and we'd have to load train car loads full of dowels, so the dowels would then be trained across country to California. That was a great job. I love that.
Yes, right in the summer, it was great.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Nobody was watching over you. Nobody was, but you obviously had to get it done because it was only there on the siding for so long. But you kind of could do your own thing, and and you get the dowels in there, and you get to have a little lunch, and it was fun over there. So there's no more rail siding here now, but there used to be a rail siding here servicing that grain mill. The grain mill was very prosperous, and in fact, the grain mill continued operations up until the 1960s. And when it closed, it was, at least again, the research in the newspapers and the clippings you see, it was purported to be, and I guess it was in this thing, this is the kind of the propaganda, I don't know if it's true or not. This was done in 1960 during the 100th anniversary, and I encourage you all to take a look at this when we break. It was the oldest grain mill in Maine. Oldest grain mill in Maine. And they made grain, of course you can imagine there were a lot of farmers here back in the day. So it was very prosperous right up until the 1960s, and then they eventually closed it. So, during C.B. Cummings' formative years from about 1860 to the late 1880s, there were many products being made at the factory and in the sawmills. There was furniture, there was long lumber and clapboards, there was grain for area livestock, there were shoe components, and there were boxes and barrel staves. You know, all pretty standard items people using all the time. And it was, again, we talked numerous times about how self-sufficient the community was, where you made most of the things you needed in the community. And, you know, much of that stuff was made at places like C.B. Cummings. I mean, there were foundries here in town. C.B. Cummings had a foundry, as you can imagine. They had horses. So they had to do all sorts of things related to wagons and wrought iron and that sort of thing. So everybody was pretty self-sufficient here back in the late 1800s. By 1886, C.B. Cummings had 100 employees and sales of over $200,000. Now, first thing you're asking me is, well, what's that worth now? Well, I looked that up. I did look that up. And so the calculator app I used calculated that would have been about $6.5 million worth of annual sales. It sounds like a pretty good chunk of money for those days. So $200,000 was probably a pretty good, pretty thriving business. Also indicative of C.B. Cummings' CB's, Charles Bradley's industriousness, are the many residential buildings he was responsible for building at both ends of town. And I won't get into the details of those, they were called certain sections of town. But if you notice right off on Whitman Street, there's a place called Cummings Place. And there are houses there still to this day that were built as part of his building years through there. And then there are several Cummings family members who also built homes that stand to this day.
I hate to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
If my memory serves me right, It may have been during the rebuilding of Main Street. Did they use steam from the boiler?
It's
to
coming
heat
up.
the site?
That's
all
coming
right.
up. That's coming up. I like your enthusiasm. It's coming up.
I was afraid you guys could pull.
No, I won't say that. No, that's good. That's good. So C.B. Cummings, when he dies in 1899, his obituary mentioned that he was of sturdy build and was bluff and hearty in manner. He loved to joke, he was generous and kind-hearted, and he was a Republican in politics and a regular attendant of the Universalist Church. That's a pretty straight guy. And I read a couple of places where he was quite the jokester. They were constantly pulling jokes on people, and I think we talked about making a great book. Some of the things that he did, and there's a lot of, he was quite the jokester. He was quite well known for that. Okay, now just real briefly, I'll tell you about the lineage here. CB had 6 children. Charles S., no, this will be very brief. Charles S. was born in 1862, so that's a year after he and Frances Staples get married. But he dies of consumption at 35. He managed the furniture store, which I guess was right here. Excuse me. Stephen B., and there's still a line of Stephen Cummingses that continue to this day. In fact, it's interesting, the Stephen Cummings line made Ripley's Believe It or Not a couple of decades ago by having something like 13 generations of Stephen Cummingses. And that continues to this day. I think the middle initial here changed, but the lineage continues. It goes back a long time. So Stephen B. is born in 1863. He passed away at 74, and he was involved in the foundry and the grain mill. The grain mill out here on Cottage Street. Fred H. was born in 1866. He passed away in 44 at the age of 78. And to the best I can tell, I don't know that he had any involvement in the company, although he's listed as one of the owners when the company becomes incorporated in the teens. George I., which is Brian Bob's, my great-grandfather, he was born in 1869, and he dies tragically from complications from a streetcar or a trolley car accident in Boston. And he'd gone to Boston representing the interests of the local shoe factory. I think he was down there trying to drum up financing perhaps, but he was down there on unrelated, un-C.B. Cummings related work. Apparently has some sort of an accident, gets hit by a streetcar, falls off a streetcar or something, but he comes back and complications arise and he dies. He dies at 45 years old. Edwin S., the last son, was born in 1878. He figures into the development of dowel planers that I'll talk about shortly. Born in 1878, he passed the age of 80. I don't recall exactly how old he was, but he retired as general manager of the company in 1957. And then finally there's Fanny, the only daughter. And Fanny was born in 1878, and I do not see a date of her passing. She doesn't factor into any of the stuff here because it was probably not directly related to the company. At least the research was with him. Fanny has offspring that ultimately comes down, and Sherry Onofrio Grant, Dick and Mary Lou Onofrio, they still live in the area, and they come from Fanny's line of the family. Okay. So let's get to the product that carried C.B. Cummings into the 20th century, and that was dowels. Okay, dowels. Volume dowel manufacturing began about 1890. Now everybody know what a dowel is? Some of these guys. Yeah, that's what those are, right? See them all the time. Seems pretty standard, pretty basic. It was pretty basic. But you had to make a lot of them. You got to make a whole lot of them to make any money out of it. So volume dowel manufacturing began in 1890. Previously, dowels had been made just for the furniture business, to support the C.B. Cummings furniture business. They weren't selling in any great length, any great extent, any dowels to the outside. They were just basically making them for their own consumption. And dowels used to be made one at a time from something called a square. This is a big one. This would make a huge dowel. But just imagine a square, really small enough to make one of these dowels. It gets put through a machine and it goes from being a square in profile to being round in profile, but you do them one at a time. Very labor intensive, very slow, and ultimately very costly. So that changes. That changes in later years due to Edwin S. Cummings. We'll talk about that in a second. In 1901, a dowel mill is built at Bemis on the shore of Moosuc-Maguntuck to produce dowels for use down here in the furniture industry. Because they were making other things. They're making things like boxes, like lumber, like barrel staves, and all sorts of things, but they weren't really making dowels down here. So Bemis is set up. The shores of Lake Moosuc-Maguntuck. And in 1901, the dowels coming from there are coming from areas with lots of raw material, because that's paper company land up there. So paper companies are doing a lot of forestry work up there. They're cutting a lot of timber. Birch is one of the things that comes back first when you have an open forest, not to mention the fact that there were birch up there anyway, probably from years past when they had forest fires. So there's lots of raw material up there. And soon after the opening of the mill in Bemis, Edwin S., who was CB's fifth son, he develops a way to produce dowels in multiple instead of one at a time. And he developed something called the dowel planer, and it revolutionized the dowel business. Hard to imagine you could revolutionize. It's like revolutionizing the buggy whip business. You revolutionized the dowel business, and it really did, because there weren't many people making dowels for sale outside, nor was there much of a demand for that. So not only does it improve the efficiency, but it also improves the quality. Now essentially what you do is you take a log, you take boltwood, and you cut it into 3 and 4 foot lengths, you run it through a sawmill, you make these boards. The boards then have to go into a dry kiln, and they have spacers in between, and they're dried from anywhere from 5 to 7 or more days to get the moisture content down to stabilize the dimensions so they don't pick up moisture. And the dowels come out really, really smooth with these dowel planers. So not only was the efficiency improved, but the quality was greatly improved over how smooth these things would be. In fact, the dowels were so smooth. So smooth. How smooth were they? They were so smooth that the company incorporated the tagline, "Those smooth ones." Now that went on everything. That went on all printed material, that went on all packaging, that went on business cards. And so I remember going to one of my first trade shows, and I hand out this business card with my name on it, the company on it, the telephone number, and all the pertinent. And across the middle in italics, quotes is, "Those smooth ones." And I remember handing it to someone. They took a look at the card. They took a look at me. They took another look at the card, and they cracked up laughing. So I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't come up with that tagline, but rest assured, these are really smooth dowels." And they were really smooth dowels. They really were those smooth ones. We get a lot of laughs out of that. In fact, anybody who saw that business card just got the biggest kick out of that. Who came up with that tagline? Nobody else had it. Nobody else would have used it. So anyway, the company enjoyed 20 good years of business at Bemis until fire destroyed the Bemis plant in 1921. What is it with fire? I guess in the wood business, you're bound to have fires at some point. But sure enough, the Bemis factory burns. And after the fire, the dowel operations were transferred to Norway. So this was in 1921. And at this time, other changes were also taking place within the company. The furniture business was sold in 1916. George, my great-grandfather, and the Partridge's great-grandfather, died from a trolley car accident in 1914. Fred resigns from the company. And I had no idea why, but you can imagine in a company, family-run business, things happen. And who knows? Decided to go on to do other things, and I don't know ultimately what happened to him. And the remaining interests of the C.B. Cummings Company were incorporated into what it became known as the C.B. Cummings and Sons Company, and that entity survived until its closing in 2003. So by 1927, dowels and furniture glue pins. Everybody know what a glue pin is?
Yes.
It's used in furniture construction. These little tiny, they have a little chamfer on the end, so they're poke into a hole, and it's done automatically. They have a big machine with a big hopper. You fill it up, spurts a pulse of glue into the hole in the joint of a chair or a table, and the glue pin chases it in, and then it's mated with the other part. And the glue pin is actually the piece, along with the glue, that holds this thing together. And furniture is full of these things. You just never see them until you break a piece of furniture. But we made millions of those things. We made 5-6 million a week. I mean, it was a pile. Just a couple of pin people right here. They were involved in that department. So there was just, you wonder where they all go. It's just we made them week after week after, and there were other people. There are Saunders Brothers. If they know about the Saunders Brothers in Westbrook, they were making millions and millions of glue pins. Just where did they all go? So dowels and furniture pins become the exclusive products in 1927. The grist mill remained open and in operation until the late 1960s. And during World War II, we continued to make wood products, but we also had a machine shop, a fairly, at the time, sophisticated machine shop. And they made precision radar parts. They made propeller shaft couplings. They made parts for anchor windlasses, parts for submarines, parts for airplanes. So they were contributing to the war effort through the machine shop. After World War II, dowel manufacturing was expanded to provide custom dowel products, custom machined products, and that's much of what you see here. And I'll point a few of these things out, because some of these things you probably recognize. The capabilities of the company were expanded at that time. For those of you who remember the plant layout, the cinder block building where all the custom dowels were produced, built right after World War II. And it was built specifically to do custom dowel operations. Value-added stuff, value-added products, because you just don't have a lot of dowel in these things. So you've got to do something to add some dowel to them, add some profit margin to them. Significant improvement was made in the 1950s to the dry kiln capacity and capabilities. And there was pretty substantial dry kilns down back here as well. It's hard to imagine that all fit on that one little site down there. Dowel boards were dried to a 5 to 7% moisture content to ensure dimensional stability, particularly for glue pins, something like glue pins. Even the glue pins, once they're made, they're put in plastic bags to keep the moisture out. Because you think about where the glue pins were being sent, they're being sent to the southeast where the furniture industry is located. It's very hot, very moist. Can easily swell those things very quickly if you leave them unprotected, so they had to be packed specially. And let's see what else here. And all the wood waste that was generated from the sawmill, from the dowel manufacturing and from the sawmill, was burned to create steam. And for those of you who are here, remember, we used to send some awful big belches of black smoke up into the sky. I mean, it was not much you could do about it. I mean, last place in the world you'd ever put a manufacturing place like that is in the middle of town. But you can't just pick up and move it either. So a lot of years of just belching smoke. And we tried really hard to kind of release the smoke under cover of darkness. We tried to reduce that. There are things you can do by not putting too much sawdust on the flame, so it has enough oxygen. But nevertheless, there were times when the black smoke would come out of the top of that thing, and it's like, it was kind of a nuisance. And next door neighbors would have sawdust that was always blowing around, and there was noise and whatnot. So again, it's a factory in the middle of town, which is a very unfortunate situation. But be that as it may, the excess steam was in fact piped across the Pennsylvania Stream to the Opera House block. And it was used to heat most of those brick buildings over there up until the 1960s, when the cost of doing that and the maintenance involved in doing that was just too much. So that's what you were talking about.
There was sidewalks too?
I don't remember sidewalks being mentioned. I'm just kind of remembering hearsay. John, do you know?
Not sidewalks, I know they did eat all of the buildings.
Yeah, all the buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then as you can imagine, those old buildings and the pipes and the traps you get, it's just probably really difficult to keep those traps clear, particularly in the wintertime. So they stopped doing it, I think it was in the 1960s.
Great deal of rules and stuff. Like that, I thought it was a great of rules and stuff.
Oh, yeah. So by the 1960s, and the only reason I'm mentioning that is because this little pamphlet, I'll take a look at this thing, was produced in 1960 as a centennial celebration of the company, and I pulled this information from there. By the 1960s, about 8,000 cords of wood per year were used at the sawmill, used at the manufacturing facility here, because there were other sawmills in conjunction with the one here in Norway. And the species of wood used were birch, maple, basswood, poplar, ash, and I with some others, but that gets most of them. There were also sawmills in Groveton, New Hampshire, in Conway, New Hampshire, and I'm a little fuzzy on I remember going to the Conway mill. I don't know when the Groveton mill, I don't remember when the Conway mill closed. But again, those were over there because there was an abundance of birch. And then we would truck them over here, which you can imagine is costly. And for the wood that was bought and produced here in town, for those of you who've been here a long time, you remember the log piles up here at the lake. We were always spraying water on those through the dry, warm months so the ends wouldn't crack. So you pretty much put water on those things once you could do that and not worry about it freezing, and you did that until freezing was occurring.
That was the tourist attraction every time we had people come.
I know, they said, "Whoa, they're logs. Why are they spraying water on those things?" That was the big thing. Why are you spraying water on those things? Good question. Maximum employment for the company reached, I believe, 250 was the highest number, about 250. And that probably was in the 60s into the 70s. And then it went down a little bit.
Does that include the other two mills?
Yeah, I think that when that number was listed, I think that included the entire operation. And in the 1960s, interesting things happened. If you look at a timeline of all of the things industrially that happened to the wood industry, and particularly to C.B. Cummings and Sons, one of the most significant things that happened was the development of multiple dowel planers. That certainly changed the game on the cost of producing these things and the quality you get from these things. And the next big thing that happened kind of globally was the invention of injection plastic molding, because that ended up changing a lot of what had been wood to much cheaper, more efficiently produced plastic parts. And plastic really did a job on a lot of wood component manufacturers in the 1960s with injection molding and the chemistries that were involved, the polymers that were involved in being able to do that. That really hurt. And then the third thing, if you're looking at the third thing, it was probably the globalization of the world economy. And two things happened. One, China opens up to the world in the 1980s and provides a source of abundant, inexpensive labor, not to mention raw materials, but inexpensive labor. China doesn't have the forest resources that we have here, but they have abundant, almost limitless, cheap labor. And the other thing that happened is the fall of the Soviet Union opened up Eastern Europe, where there were resources available and there were skilled work people, and that opened up the opportunities. And Saunders Brothers was probably one of the leaders.
I actually started a trade in Lithuania.
Yeah.
When he first went, the Russian soldiers were still there.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And we sent, Steve Cummings went over to Lithuania at one point. I went to China in 1999 with the idea that the only way we were going to survive was to maybe bring in components and maybe add some value to them and resell them. And I went to China, and I just remember coming back and telling everybody, I said, guys, there's no way we're gonna. And I went into factories that looked like I was walking into something from the 1920s. I mean, there was no light, there was dust everywhere, there were open belts, and they were just making stuff cheaper and putting it on a boat, shipping it, landing it on the West Coast cheaper than we could probably even get the first couple of manufacturing steps done. And so, I mean, it was pretty clear that there were other sources around the world for getting this stuff produced less expensively. And much of our equipment, much of our machinery was pretty specialized. It's not like we could just switch to doing something else. We had a lot of embedded infrastructure over here that it's not like we could pick that up and move it, although to Saunders Brothers' credit, I know they picked up some dowel planers and moved them overseas. And they were kind of thinking ahead on that. The rest of us probably weren't quite as forward thinking. And even for the Saunders Brothers folks, at some point it just ultimately didn't work out. But so a lot.
I gotta tell everybody.
A lot of change.
My husband ran
This is Marie.
Saunders.
Yeah, Marie.
My husband ran Saunders Brothers. Little competition.
Yeah, so Marie would work for us, and Clyde, we were friends with Clyde, and Clyde would be running the competition. Oh, one big happy family.
That's right.
One big happy family. And we had a great relationship. It was competitive, and we had a great relationship with Saunders Brothers and Sons. And there was another dowel manufacturer, J.A. Thurston, up in Rumford, who also had been in the dowel business for many, many years. We competed probably more with them on things like glue pins and stuff. They were probably a little bit smaller. Saunders Brothers was a pretty good size. We were reasonably good size. And Thurston was a little bit smaller. But all of us were trying to get pieces of a shrinking pie. Right? It was just a shrinking pie, and ultimately we know what happened. So. Dowels were the product. In the 1990s, we actually branched into doing some wood turnings. And some of these things here are wood turnings. These little spools here were produced for a yarn thread manufacturer. They would actually spin these things. It's kind of cool to go to their factory and see these things taken and watching them wind the thread on there. We made a smaller version of this that used to have dental floss put on it. I don't know if you remember back in the day, you used to buy your dental floss that was on a wooden spool. And they go back quite a ways before they went to the core, the foam core spools. And now they go to the plastic containers. Other kinds of wood turnings we did were tool handles. And we would actually finish these and put ferrules on them and sell them to tool manufacturers, Stanley Tool. We would make toy parts here. This is a little bowling set that had little bowling pins in it.
Hey, Brad, if you gotta hold it up a little longer because we can't see back here.
Yeah.
We're slow to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, these tool handles here, they're pretty standard, pretty basic. But, it was something to kind of diversify with our wood sources. And then we also had some relationships that developed in the 50s, selling through warehousing and sales representation in the Carolinas, where the furniture industry was located, continues to be located. And the furniture industry is interesting because over the 100+ years that we were in business, we watched the furniture industry start in Massachusetts, in kind of like the Gardner, Athol, Massachusetts area. There used to be a lot of furniture manufacturers there. That then moved to the upper Midwest, to Michigan, and then ultimately it settled in the Southeast, and I think it was driven by the labor, chasing inexpensive labor. And the furniture in this country, furniture manufacturing in this country has been primarily situated in the Southeast for 40 years or so, and even they have for many years, 20 or more years, gone overseas, had many of their components produced in China or in Europe, Eastern Europe, and then brought it back and assemble it. All they do is assemble it and sell it out of the Carolinas. So lots of jobs have been lost down there in the furniture industry as well. But we had this relationship from the 50s right up until the time we closed with High Point, North Carolina, where we would sell container loads of glue pins primarily. And then we also had, beginning in the 1960s, a warehouse relationship in Los Angeles, California, where we would send carloads of product out there for resales to contractors. There were few furniture manufacturers out there, and retail box stores. To go to a box store, you can see dowel displays, you can see pin displays and that sort of thing. So there was a fair amount of that business as well. When we closed in 2003, we actually probably stopped producing in 2002, and it takes quite a while to close the business. So 2003, I think, is the year we kind of closed, wrapped everything up. It had come after several poor financial years, and it was one of those things where you kind of hate to give up on something that has been your lifeblood for a long time, and I think to a fault, you sometimes hang on a little too long. We were fortunate when we got out that we had 7,000 acres of timberland that we owned that we were able to sell. Oh my God, would that have been worth some money now? Anyway, it was, we sold in the early 2000s. I think that was the .com bust. So the economy was not as good as it had been in the boom bust cycles over the years. And in any case, we had enough money certainly to pay off all of our debtors, to had a pension plan, defined pension plan, which is kind of the rare thing anymore, where we had obligations to fully fund the pension plan. And luckily, we did get out in time to do that and still have a little money left over rather than going too long and the ship is already sunk. So, but it took a couple, 3-4 years to really come to the realization that we're done. We're done. And nothing we did particularly wrong. It was just we focused on one particular type of product, and that product is same people who had the buggy whips. They probably said the same thing. Cars come along, and who needs a buggy whip anymore? I mean, who needs a glue pin anymore? I can't believe that people making glue pins were making them any more accurately than Saunders Brothers and we were making them. But they figured out how they don't need to be that good. They could just be average and you need anywhere. Same thing with dowels. How good does it need to be? It just doesn't need to be that good. So anyway, we ended up closing. Really briefly, and I'd encourage you all to come up and take a look at this stuff. This was a Tinker toy. My able colleague. No, stay together. Stay together. This was actually a knockoff. We did make Tinker toys, but then there was a guy who came along, a guy in Texas who was very entrepreneurial, and he did a knockoff on Tinker toys called Fiddlesticks. Same concept. Dowels are bigger, the turnings are bigger, the dowels are slotted, they're painted, they look just like a big version of Tinker toys. And we made a lot of these. And a lot of these turnings, they were done up in we used to call it the Longley building. The white building up here, the corn shop up here where the wood was piled. And we had a nice little compact turning operation there. So we made hundreds of thousands of these things. He went to China. He went to China. He could get this thing fully boxed and landed in the United States for less than we could make the components for before we ever shipped them out of here. And
I bet they weren't as good.
yeah, they were probably good enough. They were probably good enough.
Yeah.
This same guy who did these also did a knockoff on Lincoln logs, and everybody's seen Lincoln logs. But Steve Cummings did a really great job designing a really clever contraption. And this is poplar, really lightweight, and it's inexpensive. He made a really cool machine to actually put those grooves in there and keep them aligned. And this thing made tons of these things. China. This thing was part of a, I think there were, as I recall, there were two of these things together? Yeah. There were two of these things together, and there was an end cap here. And then we made dowels that were slotted, opposed, the slots were opposing slots. And a little kid could take a wooden hammer and hammer these things through this thing. Pound peg, that's what it was. Very good, pound peg. Pound peg. And of course, everybody knows what these guys are. Everybody knows what these guys are, Monopoly hotels and houses. Now that got killed when injection molding plastics came along in the 1960s. Rumor has it, the story is that the monopoly hotels and houses was one of the things that got us through the Depression. Because if you think about it, I think that game was very popular during the Depression, maybe even developed during the Depression. And we made boatloads of those things. Boatloads of things, yeah, part of them. And so that's the story. I'm sticking by it. It sounds great. I'm sure it was very important to us during the Depression. The things were tough. That's it. It's urban legend. These little cards were these were little sales things. This is pretty old. This is old. But these were little things we would send out to people when we sent samples, and we'd show them the various things that we could do to dowels. And every one of these things had a purpose. I mean, if you look at this, there's a cuticle stick in here, beveled on one end, tapered on the other. It's got some other things in here as well. I couldn't tell you what some of these were used for, but this was basically sent out to show people what our capabilities were, and this was that custom manufacturing that really took an explosion in the 1950s. These little chips right here, I was thinking that we had a short run of these things, and these might have been poker chips. I just can't remember, but I remember the machines that we were having these produced on, and I just don't remember who the customer was on that. This thing was kind of nice. We sold these dowels. Brian probably made these. Brian, did you make
Well,
these?
I don't know. I jammed up the return machine. So
you fed these dowels one at a time through this return machine, and it would pull them through, and it would put the spiral on there. And it was just slow, and you just did it, and it made them look nice. And we took these dowels, we put tapers on the end, we drilled the sides on them, had some really efficient machinery to do that, and that would go really, really fast. And we sold all of these dowels to a guy in Brooklyn who was involved in the textile business, and he had a shop full of ladies who would take fabric and cut it out and sew it and then assemble these things, and he sold gobs of these things. And, you know, it was a great knitting basket. I mean, they're great little knitting baskets.
I made a dowel on this. It's a little nickel return machine.
They carve your initials into them. Anybody who's ever used one of these things? Oh man, we sold hundreds of thousands of dowels to a company called Thomas Batts.
Fred, your dad told me that was where those smooth ones came from because they didn't snag the pants.
Oh, now there you go.
Stewart story.
That's a Stewart story.
I don't know.
Is it true? Of course.
Now that makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. Because I just can't believe they pulled that out of a whole cloth and just then it gets gas out those business cards.
then it was dim smooth.
Dim smooth. So we made hundreds of thousands of these things. And these actually had a little bit of a chamfer on the ends to make the ease of assembly. So they're going to the holes really easily. And then we made millions of these things. Oh, paintbrush handles for Crumbacker, for Winsor Newton, for Denny and Smith, who were the crayon people. I don't know if they still are or not. They were back in the day. But these little wooden dowels they were shaped, and they were made on a very specialized machine called a Hempel sander. And they were very temperamental. They were very, very difficult to get them calibrated because the dowel would be carried through, it would be spun, and it would be pressed up against a template that had the particular profile that you wanted to get. And the key was in the ferrule end. You had to keep the tolerances such that when they assembled the ferrule on the end of this thing, the ferrule didn't go on too far, or maybe didn't go on far enough, because these were dipped in lacquer, and then the ferrules were put on, and if the ferrule didn't go on just the right depth, then the brush handle, you couldn't line them up like this, and they'd be a different. They look like this, you know. But oh, there's something on here. And so those machines were really difficult. And Darrell St. John ran those machines for years. I know, it was really hard. It was a really hard job. David Seams was also involved in that too. He handles the machines a lot. So there's a lot of setup involved in that.
Hey, Brad?
Yeah.
All those people who raised their hands, like, could we have everyone say what they did?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, those are all the samples I've got, so again, we just...
And what were labor conditions
thousands.
like in the Cummings plant?
Yeah, well,
They get breaks?
no air conditioning, I'll tell you that. How was that? That was pretty bad, wasn't it?
Yeah.
There were some days in the summertime where it was bad. Yeah, it was bad. Probably days in the wintertime, but it might be bad too. Yeah, so Marie and Pat, what did
Yep. Well, I clip dowels, which is cutting bad parts out of the dowels. And then I also worked in the pin room soldering to pull out everything that was bad. And even when you were in your 20s, when you left Cummings at 3:30, you looked about like an 80-year-old woman. There was so much sawdust in your hair. You had to wash your hair every night.
I can't imagine how many glue pins passed in front of you. It must
few.
a billion. I mean, it
I
must
worked
be.
there, I think, 23 years. I think.
It must be.
I was at 39.
30
Wow.
Yeah, what did you do?
I clipped dowels like Marie, and then I worked in the mill across from where you did the finishing.
The custom
Custom part, yeah.
Custom
I was assistant boss.
Yep.
And
Yeah, and when they say clipping, this was very important because you would take a 4-foot-long dowel and it would have knots in it, or it'd have cracks. And somebody had to take these dowels and cut out the bad places. And there was a little bench, a big bench that they sat at, and it had increments of multiples of every inch or every 2 inches. And they had to clip out the longest length they could of a pure, clean dowel, and then those dowels were taken to a different department, and they were tied up into bundles, standard bundle sizes, like 14 inches, 18 inches, 21 inches, whatever the case may be. So again, there was a lot of hand work involved in that.
Sometimes we even clip inch dowels.
Inch dowels, yeah, those are really hard.
You don't clip many of those.
No, you don't. Well, John, you were there a long time.
I was there a few years.
Yeah.
I think 32, I'm not sure. I actually started carrying dowels when I was in high school. I went to work there after I was in the Navy for 5 years. I worked at the paint room nights for a couple of years. I went on days and started scaling logs in the yard and ended up running the sawmill. My brother also worked there. He went into sales. I went into the sawmill. I did just about everything. I ended up doing some production work. The turnings, I did a lot of quotes on turnings. Bought wood, managed store, timberlands. You know, towards the end of it, everybody wore different hats. But
Yeah, you know, that was kind of the special thing about the place. We had a lot of people who were there many years, many years. Not only that, but sometimes their parents had been there as well for many years. So it was.
my father-in-law was there, I think 50-something years.
Yep. Yeah, that's something.
Yeah. When they first started out, they brought the wood in with the horses.
Yep.
He didn't like horses much.
Yeah.
Said you had to be very careful, they could kick you.
Yeah, you know, we've got some great pictures over here. As you get up and move around a little bit, there's a couple of pictures here of the Bemis operation. And this is the kind of the wood we're talking about.
Wow.
So they're cutting that, and they're doing this stuff. They're doing this stuff back in the horse days before you have all this mechanized stuff. And I love this one. This one, you see the two guys standing up on top of the pile?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I don't want to. I can't imagine how dangerous that must have been.
Yeah.
No OSHA back then.
So anyway, there are these wonderful old photos. Come have a look, and there's a picture of the facility. Picture of the facility here.
Yeah.
People can take a look at. And this is all crammed into that location right over where the medical building is. It's hard to believe it was all there, and the plan when we closed is the Growth Council bought it with the hopes of developing it, and that didn't work out. But thank goodness we had done a good job of keeping things clean, because in a lot of industrial sites like that, you never know what's in the soil, what's been leaked, what's been thrown in the water. And we've always done a pretty good job of being cognizant of that. So the site, thank goodness, got a clean bill of health once it was cleaned up, and then it just looks beautiful down there right now. And then the Growth Council, I think it was the Growth Council, put a lovely monument right on the sidewalk there, talking about the mill site and the generations of people who've been there. So it's a really nice plaque.
The young Ed Cummings that we went to school with in the 60s.
Yep.
Whatever.
He's passed. He's passed away.
Did he get involved in the mill?
Oh yeah, very much so. He was the vice president and I think treasurer when my dad was president before me.
He did a lot of the engineering.
Ed did a lot of the engineering. He's worked very closely with the machine shop there, and his father had been Elliot had been the general manager after our grandfather retired. So Ed was involved in the business for many years.
Is it true that one of the Cummings used to live in the gingerbread house?
Yes. Help me. Fred. That was Fred.
Non-driver.
That was Fred, the guy who left with no. I don't know what Fred's story is.
TV.
CB lived there
TV.
also.
CB lived there?
Yeah.
He had tuberculosis.
Oh, did he? Yeah.
Fred was the last one to
Oh.
live there.
Oh, was he?
But CB had lived there first.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
And then
Oh,
this house.
yeah.
CB went to.
Yeah, the house, the gingerbread house right behind us here, one of the Cummings is built salmon. Was that CB?
I don't know if he built it, but CB lived there for a while.
The house right over here?
Yeah.
St. John's used to live there.
I can believe that great big gingerbread house, just one family lived there.
I know.
It's pretty narrow though. It's so narrow.
Was it Fred that was a non-driver? Had to put the turntable in the barn?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, that building is still down there, isn't it?
Yeah.
Richard's here. I think so, too. Steve Cummings is on his original. That house was, pictures you see of that house back when it was at its original location of the gardens in front of it, it was just lovely. Just a beautiful place.
And Richard, who's here, bought the carriage house
Oh, cool.
and is saving the turntable, right?
Yeah,
Oh, that's cool.
what happened over the years when Howard James owned the property, they pushed a lot of soil up against the building and all the infrastructure underneath rotted away. I don't know if you remember 5-6 years ago, it was kind of saggy. So last summer we engaged a bunch of barn framers that came in, we lifted it up, put new underpinnings under it. It's now 10.5 inches taller than it originally was, so that means that the turntable would have been 10 inches lower.
Yeah.
So we shimmed that up, and now everything works again. But in the process, we dismantled that turntable, and it's a beautifully engineered piece of work, and I wonder whether maybe the machine shop in town or whoever might have built that. It's a big bearing in the middle and a 12.5-foot diameter ring with a bunch of little iron wheels on it, and it still works.
Sounds like you have the makings of a wonderful merry-go-round.
Yeah.
Summer, the Arts Festival, we open that up for merry-go-round. Do you have any plans for it? Do you have any plans for it in the future?
Not really.
Yeah.
No, we'll occupy it somehow. But,
Pretty cool, yeah.
And a really big pizza.
mainly wanted to keep it from falling into the creek.
Sure.
And Richard, didn't CB, isn't he the one that had the turntable built?
I think it was Fred. The building, from what we can tell, was built relatively recently, in about 1918 or 1919. And it was clearly built to house horses.
Oh, yeah.
There's four stalls in there. The main part of it, where the turntable is a big open room, but part of it has horse stalls with the ability to drop hay down from up above. So apparently Fred was a horse lover even in the 1920s.
In his memory, inanimate horses. In his memory, inanimate horses.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know what turntable. What is a turntable? I don't know what that means. I thought he'd break it
Like a
right.
big lazy Susan.
Well, it's a big record player, but what would have been its purpose?
Bring the car in, drive it in,
Okay,
drive it out.
that's what I was thinking. Okay.
Never had it back.
Because there was one entrance.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you went in the stream.
They use those in train stations sometimes when you drive an engine in and they train it around and just turn the whole thing.
That they used to do.
So anyway, that's the story of the C.B. Cummings and Sons Company, and it was a long-lived story, certainly, a lot of different products, a lot of wonderful people spend a lot of time there.
Your father was a nice person to work for, I'll tell you.
Was he?
He was very nice.
Let's hear that. Again, Stuart.
He was. He was a good worker, yeah.
He's always seemed pretty fair.
Yeah, he was very
Pretty fair.
Yeah.
He roasted me out.
And very impossible to walk down the street with during the art festival, because he knew all of you.
Back on company products, customers.
Yep.
So was Parker Brothers and Fisher Price almost exclusively made for C.B. Cummings doll parts?
Well, remember there was I remember one particular product, and we had this, our kids, remember the popcorn popper?
Yeah.
Yes. Drive any parent crazy? It's like, somebody gives a kid a popcorn popper and said, oh, thanks a lot. The dowels were in that. Yeah, they made tons of those. Tons of those.
Were there a lot of drumsticks made?
Yeah, in fact, I forgot to mention drumsticks. Yeah, we made a pile of drumsticks. The trick with drumsticks is kind of like these brush handles. You got to get them pretty straight. And wood just by nature, I mean, look at these dowels. These dowels are pretty good, but they've been sitting around forever. They're just not straight. I mean, they start to wobble a little bit. And we did make a lot of drumsticks, but it was one of those products that was always so fussy that we just didn't really put the effort into that other people did. Keyfield Wood Products.
We made a conductor.
Yeah, conductor batons.
Yeah.
And little things, if you remember in grade school, and probably all of us can go back to the day when you had the little sticks and you bang the sticks together to get rhythm, and you had the little dowels that were either red or blue or green, and they would be used in music class, and we just made tons of those.
They made
Did you know her?
clothes racks too.
Yep, clothes racks, everybody was in the wooden clothes racks, and the little dowels, and we just found one again.
Folding footrests.
Folding footrests. I mean, how many of those did we break and kind of playing with them? And it's one of these things that fold and close. Then you open it up and you all dowels, and you could kind of rest your legs on it like you would on a hassock, except they ran out of dowels.
You have one of those here?
I don't.
I do have one. I could donate.
We have a couple in the collection.
But we broke a lot of those as grandkids playing on those things, racking them back and forth. Doing what kids do.
You also made golf tees, and I'm wondering about the possible competition between Brown Novelty and C.B. Cummings, because Brown Novelty was the first to produce golf tees, but we have very, very nice examples of Cummings.
Yep, and if we made golf tees, it was before my time, and I started there in '87. And we weren't making golf tees at that time because a company called Pride Manufacturing up in Guilford, Maine, made bajillions of those things. They were the world's largest golf tee manufacturer, and that was so specialized. It was made out of a particular 7/16 diameter dowel, and they had just aisles of machines with these hoppers loaded with 7/16 dowels cut to the proper 18-inch lengths, And those things were just spitting out golf tees like bullets. And eventually, even they had trouble making them cheaply enough. They took their operation, the golf tee operation, to China. But if we made golf tees, it was not probably when I was there, but we could conceivably have easily made them. If you got some samples here, I don't know. I don't remember ever making those when I was there. That had been pretty well specialized and prior to taking over.
I had some. Yeah.
So we had made some.
I had a big handful, and the last time they had a thing, I brought some into Steve.
Oh, yeah. So we did make some, yeah. But it's one of those things that was so specialized. It was like glue pens. Not everybody made glue pens here because you just had to be so efficient in how you made these things and how you prepared your stock. And one of the problems is that it takes a lot of short pieces, so you got to have a combination of long lengths and short lengths so you use everything up. That can be a real trick sometimes, not having the right combination of products to chew up every bit of wood that you produce in a dowel product.
Did you ever make baseball bats?
We made some novelty. Yeah, we made some little novelty baseball bats that you might see at the. They might give them out as novelty items at the baseball game, but none of the true. No, and if you think about it, you have to have pieces of wood that are 3-4 feet long. And what do you do with all the pieces that are short? You have to have a use for those.
Midget league. A midget league.
Yeah. We didn't think of that.
I'm curious about the maintenance of the equipment. The cutting edges have to be kept sharp all the time.
We had a very talented machine shop, and they were busy all the time grinding those cutters down to make sure that those smooth ones met the reputation. There was a machine shop that was kept very, very busy with.
That's why I always jam the return machine.
Yeah, it was the machine shop.
And Cousin Ed would come by and he'd stop my machine and have somebody come change the blades.
Yeah, that was pretty critical. And you know, not everybody could do that too. It took quite a while for somebody to learn how to put those edges on there and to have it work well.
What happened to the machinery when you finally closed down?
Oh, I got a newspaper article right here
market for it?
With my sad face on there. It was all sold off at auction. There were some people, Summers may have brought, I don't know if they bought any of those pieces or not, moved them somewhere else.
Yeah, but they were still able to be used at that
Oh yeah, they're still, everything was operational, everything was still fine when we decided to close. It was just.
When Clyde ran Main Dowell.
Okay, yeah.
Cummings bought some of the equipment.
Yep. And so that usually happens, you know, the people the survivors usually come in and buy up the equipment. But we stayed in long enough that we were one of the last ones to go, and so there wasn't a lot of demand for that stuff. Unless somebody was going to pick it up and put it overseas, because nobody was going to probably take that stuff domestically and produce dowels inexpensively enough that would pay off. Yeah, it's interesting. Any other questions?
Yeah. What happened to the sign?
No, that is a mystery. I don't know whatever happened to that.
Because
it was a wonderful sign.
It was a great sign, and after the closure, it was there for a very long time. And I kept thinking, as a historical society, would probably want it.
The sign disappeared. That's going to be in the that's the sequel. That's the sequel book to the historical novel I'm going to write. Yeah. I don't know, and we asked that a number of questions, and nobody can seem to remember it. And I'm sure it got taken down and set somewhere with good intention, and we don't know where it went.
There's still hope because a giant snowshoe was found, right?
Well, yeah, you never know when somebody might just all of a sudden say, hey, somebody might like that. That wasn't really nice sign. Okay, is that good? Please come up and take a look at this stuff. You can kind of see it and feel it and touch it if you want to.
Brad, great job.
Thank you.